The rain came down in sheets that night. Not the gentle kind that whispers against windows, not the romantic kind from movies. This was the East Coast autumn rain that hammered pavement and turned parking lots into rivers, the kind that soaked through scrubs in seconds and made the world smell like wet asphalt and regret. Margaret Thorne stood under the narrow awning of Mercy General Hospital's emergency entrance, watching the water cascade off the edge like a curtain. Behind her, through the sliding glass doors, the fluorescent lights of the ER blazed with that particular institutional brightness that made everything look both sterile and somehow dirty at the same time. She was 40 years old. She looked older tonight. Her navy blue scrubs hung loose on her frame. Her hair, more gray than brown now, was pulled back in a simple ponytail. No makeup, no jewelry except for the battered G-Shock watch on her left wrist. The watch face was scratched to hell. The band was faded from black to a washed-out charcoal, but it still kept perfect time. In the reflection of the rain-streaked glass, she could see her own eyes. Tired, hollow. The kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. She had been fired 20 minutes ago. But that's not where this story begins. Not really. To understand what happened that night, you have to go back. Not all the way back, just far enough. 72 hours earlier. The night shift at Mercy General started the way it always did. Quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that made experienced ER nurses nervous. The kind that always came before chaos. Margaret Thorne clocked in at 11 p.m. She changed into her scrubs in the women's locker room. Navy blue, 2 sizes too big. She'd lost weight over the past few months. Hadn't bothered to replace the uniforms. She tied her hair back, washed her hands, took a breath. Then she walked out into the fluorescent hell of Trauma Bay 1. Doctor. Ryan Sterling was already holding court. He stood at the center of a cluster of residents. Young doctors fresh out of medical school, eager, terrified, desperate to impress. Sterling loved that desperation, fed on it. 32 years old, Harvard Medical School, chief of trauma surgery, the youngest in the hospital's history. He was handsome in that specific way that comes from good genes and better money, square jaw, perfect teeth, the kind of face that looks airbrushed even in harsh fluorescent light. His father was Senator Marcus Sterling. His mother sat on the boards of 3 major hospitals. He'd never had to fight for anything in his life. "Listen up," he was saying. His voice had that particular pitch, the one that said he was performing. "In trauma, you are gods. You decide who lives, who dies. You don't hesitate. You don't flinch." He paused, let the words hang. Then his eyes found Margaret. "Unlike some staff members," he continued, raising his voice slightly, "who flinch at the sound of a dropped tray." A few of the residents snickered. Nervous laughter, the kind you make when someone with power over you tells a joke that isn't funny. Margaret kept her eyes down, kept walking. She had learned over 3 months at this hospital that invisibility was survival. She moved past them toward the utility closet. Her gait was careful, deliberate. Some of the staff thought she was slow, clumsy. They didn't understand that every movement she made was calculated. Years of training, energy conservation, a habit from a different life. She retrieved the mop and bucket, yellow plastic. One of the wheels stuck. She kicked it with practiced precision, and it snapped into place. Behind her, Sterling was still talking. "You see a problem, you fix it. Fast. Decisive. That's what separates the competent from the—" He trailed off, made a dismissive gesture in Margaret's direction without looking at her. "Well, from the support staff." More laughter. Margaret wheeled the bucket out into the main floor. The linoleum was scuffed. Someone had tracked mud through earlier. Or maybe blood. Hard to tell under the lights. She began to mop. The ER at night had a particular rhythm. The hum of monitors, the distant beep of IV pumps, the occasional groan of a patient in one of the curtained bays, low voices, the rustle of paper charts, the squeak of sneakers on linoleum. Margaret knew these sounds, not from 3 months at Mercy General, from somewhere else, somewhere far away. She pushed the mop across the floor in long, even strokes. Her hands were steady. They always were, despite what Sterling thought, despite what he said. The old G-Shock on her wrist caught the light, scratched face, faded band. She'd worn this watch through dust storms and firefights, through surgeries in shot-up buildings and extractions under mortar fire. It had never failed her, just like she'd never failed the men and women who depended on her, until she came here. Hart, she looked up. Sterling was striding toward her, the residents scattered like birds. "For God's sake," Sterling said, stopping a few feet away. "Are you mopping the floor or painting the Mona Lisa? We have a trauma incoming in 10 minutes. Try to make the floor less of a death trap, would you?" Margaret didn't meet his eyes. "Yes, doctor," she said. Her voice was soft, flat, devoid of anything that might be interpreted as challenge. "Unbelievable," Sterling muttered. He turned to the head nurse, Vanessa Cole, who functioned more as his personal cheerleader than medical professional. "HR sends me geriatric washouts when I ask for trauma specialists. She's 40 if she's a day, and she moves like she's underwater." Vanessa laughed, a sharp grating sound. "She's just slow, doctor." "Sterling," Vanessa said. Vanessa was 35, perfectly applied makeup that somehow never smudged during 12-hour shifts. Nails done, hair styled. She looked like she belonged on a reality show, not in an emergency room. Some people aren't built for the pace of a level 1 trauma center. Maybe she'd be better off in the cafeteria. Margaret squeezed the mop into the yellow bucket. The dirty water swirled. Dark, murky, much like her memories. She didn't speak, didn't defend herself, just kept working. This was the first humiliation of the night. It would not be the last. Margaret finished mopping and wheeled the bucket back to the utility closet. The stuck wheel caught again. She kicked it. It freed. Inside the closet, she stowed the mop carefully, hung the bucket on its hook, everything in its place. Another habit from before. When she came back out, she headed for the patient chart rack. Maybe she could find something simple to do, a laceration to clean, a fever to monitor, something to keep her away from Sterling's orbit. Vanessa stepped in front of the rack. "Dr. Sterling needs his coffee," Vanessa said. Her smile was sharp. "Black 2 sugars. And check bed 4. The drunk guy threw up again. Clean it up." Margaret looked at her just for a moment. Something flickered in Margaret's eyes. Something cold, dangerous. The look of a woman who had once stared down worse things than petty hospital politics. The look of someone who had negotiated with warlords and told colonels to their faces when they were wrong. Vanessa saw it, felt it, took an involuntary half-step back. Her smile faltered. Then the look was gone. Margaret lowered her eyes. "I'm a registered nurse, Vanessa," Margaret said quietly. "Not a janitor. The janitorial staff is on break, but I can call—" "I'm the charge nurse," Vanessa snapped. Her voice shook slightly. She was trying to recover from whatever she'd just seen in Margaret's eyes. "And I'm telling you to clean bed 4, unless you want me to write you up for insubordination. Again. I'm sure the board would love to hear how the new hire is refusing direct orders." Margaret held Vanessa's gaze for one more second. In that second, Vanessa saw something she couldn't quite name, couldn't quite place. It was like staring at the surface of deep water and knowing instinctively that something huge was moving beneath. Then Margaret lowered her eyes. "I'll take care of it," she said. "Good," Vanessa said. She was trying to sound confident, authoritative, but her voice still trembled. "And hurry up. The multi-car pileup is 5 minutes out." This was the second humiliation. Margaret walked toward bed 4. As she did, she checked her watch. The old G-Shock. The face was scratched, the band faded. But it kept perfect time, 5 minutes out. She knew what that meant. She could feel it. The shift in air pressure, the static electricity that precedes chaos. She had felt it before. in places that didn't exist on official maps, in cities that were just grid coordinates and danger. She pulled the curtain around bed 4. The patient was an elderly man. The staff called him Thomas when they remembered he existed. Most of the time they just called him the drunk in 4. Thomas Webb, 68 years old, Gulf War veteran. He'd served as a combat engineer during Desert Storm, came home with medals and nightmares. The medals were long gone, sold or lost. The nightmares remained. The smell of cheap whiskey and unwashed clothes clung to him like a second skin, but his eyes, when they focused, were sharp. "Sorry, darling," he slurred. He wiped his mouth with a shaking hand. "Sick as a dog." "It's okay, Thomas," Margaret said. Her voice changed instantly. From the monotone she used with Sterling and Vanessa to something warm, gentle, human. She worked efficiently, cleaned him up, checked his vitals, adjusted his IV drip. Someone had set the flow rate too high. Another small incompetence she would fix without comment. "You're dehydrated," she told him. "That's why the nausea is hitting you so hard. I'm slowing the drip. You'll feel better in a moment." "You're a good one," Thomas mumbled. His eyes were already closing. "Better than the loud guy in the white coat. He scares me." "He scares himself, Thomas," Margaret whispered. She pulled the blanket up to his chin. "Rest now." Thomas grabbed her hand. His grip was surprisingly strong. "You got that look," he said. His words were slurred, but his eyes were suddenly clear, focused. "Seen things, bad things, desert mountains." Margaret went very still. "Both?" she said quietly. Thomas nodded, released her hand. "Thought so," he said. "You move like us, like soldiers, careful, always watching." He closed his eyes. "You're too good for this place," he whispered. Margaret didn't respond, just tucked the blanket tighter and stepped out from behind the curtain, just as the red lights above the bay doors began to flash. The ambulance bay doors hissed open. Wind and rain rushed in. "Showtime, people!" Sterling shouted. He clapped his hands together. "Let's see if we can save some lives despite the support staff's incompetence." Margaret stood by the wall, invisible, waiting. She knew the storm wasn't just outside, it was walking through those doors. The ER exploded into controlled chaos. 3 stretchers wheeled in simultaneously. The paramedics looked drenched, exhausted, running on adrenaline and coffee. "Multi-vehicle collision on I-95, the lead paramedic yelled over the noise. "We have a 45-year-old male unrestrained driver blunt force trauma to the chest. A 20-year-old female passenger severe lacerations and possible internal bleeding. And a child, 8 years old, unconscious, vitals dropping." Sterling moved like he was conducting an orchestra. "I'll take the driver in Bay 1, he barked. "Brennan, you take the girl in Bay 2. Vanessa, get the kid to Bay 3 and Page Pediatrics. Tell them to get down here yesterday." The room became a hive of movement, shouting voices, ripping Velcro, the shrill alarm of cardiac monitors screaming warnings. Dr. Kira Brennan was a resident, 28 years old, talented but terrified. She'd been working under Sterling for 6 months. 6 months of verbal abuse disguised as teaching. 6 months of being told she was too slow, too hesitant, too female for trauma surgery. She rushed toward Bay 2, her hands already shaking. Margaret moved to assist her. It was instinct. See a problem, help solve it. Vanessa shoved her shoulder hard. "Not their heart," Vanessa hissed. "We need gauze and saline in Bay 1. Go be a runner. Don't touch the patients." Margaret didn't argue, didn't waste breath on words that wouldn't matter. She ran to the supply room, grabbed armfuls of saline bags and trauma pads, sprinted back to Bay 1. Sterling was a blur of motion, barking orders at a terrifying speed. "BP is crashing," he shouted. "He's got tension pneumothorax. I need a needle, 14 gauge, now." A young resident, fresh-faced and frozen with fear, fumbled with the packaging. His hands shook. The needle clattered to the floor. "You idiot!" Sterling roared. His face was red. veins standing out on his neck. "Get another one." The resident froze completely, locked up, all his medical school training evaporating under Sterling's rage. The patient on the table was turning blue. Margaret saw it happening, saw the trachea deviating to the left, the telltale sign. Tension pneumothorax, air building up in the pleural space, compressing the lung, shifting the heart. The patient had maybe 10 seconds before his heart stopped from the pressure. The resident couldn't open the new needle packaging. His hands were shaking too badly. Sterling was too busy trying to intubate, couldn't reach over. The monitor's beeping became frantic, high-pitched, insistent. 10 seconds. 9. 8. Margaret didn't think. Thinking was for people who had time, for people who weren't watching someone die. She just moved. Her hands had done this before, in dirt and blood and chaos, in places where hesitation meant death. She didn't grab the needle the resident was struggling with. She reached into her pocket, the pocket where she kept her trauma shears, and a spare decompression needle, a habit she couldn't break, a habit from before. She stepped up to the patient's right side. Her left hand palpated the second intercostal space at the mid-clavicular line, finding the exact spot by feel alone. No hesitation. Her right hand drove the needle in, one fluid motion, smooth, confident, perfect. There was a sharp hiss, escaping air, like opening a pressurized can. The patient's chest heaved, rose, fell. The bluish tint faded from his skin. Color returned, pink spreading across his face like a sunrise. The monitor's frantic beeping slowed, steadied, found rhythm. Margaret taped the catheter in place, stepped back. Her face was blank, empty. Silence, absolute, stunned, silence. The resident stared at her, mouth open. Vanessa stared. Her perfect makeup couldn't hide the shock. Dr. Brennan turned from Bay 2, eyes wide. Slowly, Dr. Ryan Sterling looked up from the intubation. He looked at the needle sticking out of the patient's chest. Then he looked at Margaret. His face turned a shade of purple that matched the bruises on the patient. "What?" His voice was barely a whisper, trembling with rage. "What did you just do?" Margaret met his eyes. For the first time all night, she met his eyes directly. "He was crashing, doctor," she said. Her voice was calm, clinical. The resident was compromised. Tension pneumothorax. I relieved it. Sats are rising, 94% and climbing. "You?" Sterling stepped away from the table, ripped his gloves off. The latex snapped like a whip. "You are a nurse. You are a nurse. You do not perform invasive procedures in my emergency room. You could have killed him. I saved him," Margaret said. Her chin lifted slightly, just slightly. "He would have arrested in 10 seconds. "I don't care if you turned water into wine," Sterling screamed. He stepped into her personal space, using his height, his size, trying to intimidate. "You are unlicensed for that procedure in this facility. That is assault. That is malpractice. You are a liability." "Dr. Sterling," Dr. Brennan called out from Bay 2. She was trying to defuse the situation. Her patient was stable. She could see what was happening. The patient is stable. She's... "Shut up, Brennan." Sterling spun back to Margaret. His face was crimson now, spittle forming at the corners of his mouth. "Get out." Margaret blinked. "Doctor, get out." Sterling pointed toward the automatic doors. His hand was shaking. "You are fired. Immediately. Get your things and get off my floor before I have security throw you out. I will make sure you never work in a hospital in this state again. You're done." The entire ER was watching now. Residents, nurses, paramedics, even the patients who were conscious. The child in Bay 3 was crying. The woman in Bay 2 was staring. Margaret looked around the room. She saw pity in some eyes, satisfaction in Vanessa's, fear in Dr. Brennan's, confusion in the residents'. She felt a familiar weight in her chest, the weight of injustice, of being punished for doing the right thing. But she had swallowed worse things than the ego of a civilian doctor. She unclipped her ID badge from her scrubs. The plastic felt light in her hand. Strange, like it had never really belonged there anyway. "Fine," she said softly. She placed the badge on the metal tray next to the biohazard bin. "Good luck with your shift," she said. Then she turned and walked away. The walk of shame. She could feel Sterling's eyes boring into her back, could feel the stares of everyone in the room. "And don't expect a reference," Sterling shouted after her. His voice was triumphant now, vindicated. "You're done in this profession. Done!" Margaret pushed through the doors into the waiting room. The cold air hit her face, the smell of rain, of wet pavement, of freedom and failure mixed together. She walked past confused families, past children with fevers, past old men with chest pain, past the security guard who gave her a sympathetic nod, out into the rainy night. She stood under the awning of the hospital entrance. The rain soaked the bottom of her scrub pants within seconds. The water was cold, made her shiver. She reached into her pocket for her car keys. Her hands were shaking now. The adrenaline was fading. The reality was setting in. She was unemployed. She had rent to pay, bills, a life that required money and purpose, and neither of those things was waiting for her in that parking lot. She had tried to live a normal life, a quiet life, to be invisible, to help people without the weight of what she used to be, and she had failed. She thought about her mother, 3 years in the ground now, cancer, the reason Margaret had left active duty, to take care of her, to be there at the end. Her mother had told her in those final weeks to find peace, to let go of the war, to build something new. Margaret had tried. God, she had tried. "Maybe I am broken," she thought. "Maybe I don't belong anywhere anymore." She took a step toward the parking lot, toward her 10-year-old Honda, toward whatever came next. That's when she heard it. A sound. Distant, almost imperceptible. The kind of sound that makes the hairs on your neck stand up even when you can't quite identify why. Margaret froze. Her hand went to her watch, the old G-Shock. She pressed the worn face. The sound grew, not like normal sounds grow. This was different, exponential, building on itself, a low thrumming, deep, subsonic. The kind of frequency you feel in your bones before your ears register it. Margaret felt it in her sternum, in her jaw, in the hollow spaces of her skull. The concrete under her feet began to vibrate. The metal awning above her head started to rattle. A sound like 10,000 quarters in a dryer. Car alarms started going off, one at first. A white sedan near the ambulance bay, then another. A pickup truck in the visitor parking, then a dozen more. A symphony of electronic panic spreading through the lot like dominoes falling. Margaret looked up, through the rain, through the darkness. The clouds were moving wrong, not drifting, being pushed, shoved aside by something massive and invisible and coming down fast. The vibration became rhythmic beating. Whoomp, 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 heavy, mechanical, each beat hitting the air like a fist. Margaret's breathing changed, quick, controlled, not panic, recognition. She knew this sound the way a mother knows her baby's cry, the way a sailor knows the sea, deep, primal, written into the architecture of her nervous system. Rotor blades, not the light ones, not the high-pitched whine of civilian medical transport helicopters. This was different. This was military. This was the deep, authoritative thump of Sikorsky turbine engines pushing air with enough force to bend trees and scatter debris and make the rain itself dance sideways. The beating became a roar, deafening, overwhelming. The kind of sound that doesn't just enter your ears, but invades your whole body. Your chest cavity becomes a resonance chamber. Your teeth vibrate. Your vision blurs. And then Margaret saw it, dropping through the clouds like a bird of prey. Matte black, no markings, no hospital logos, no civilian identification of any kind. Just dark paint and hard angles and the unmistakable silhouette of an MH-60 Seahawk, military, through and through. It wasn't heading for the rooftop helipad. It was coming down right into the parking lot. The rotor wash hit like a bomb. Debris exploded outward. Trash cans tumbled. Paper and leaves and loose gravel became projectiles. The rain didn't fall anymore. It flew, horizontal, chaotic. 3 car windows shattered from the pressure differential. The helicopter's wheels touched asphalt with a weight you could feel through the building's foundation. A deep, subsonic thud that made the walls groan. The side door slid open before the rotors even began to slow. And Margaret Thorne, standing in the rain with her cheap scrubs and her beaten-down posture, felt something she thought she'd lost forever. Purpose. Inside the emergency room, chaos erupted. The sound had started 30 seconds ago. Now it was deafening, all-consuming. The roar of military-grade turbine engines that made the walls shake and set off every car alarm in a 3-block radius. Residents rushed to the windows, nurses pressed against the glass. Even patients who could move dragged themselves toward the light to see what was descending from the storm clouds. Dr. Sterling stood at the nurse's station, his perfect hair, his perfect teeth, his perfect world suddenly very small. "What the hell is that?" he said. Nobody answered. Everyone was staring. The matte black Sikorsky MH-60 Seahawk came down hard. Not toward the rooftop helipad where civilized medical transport helicopters landed. Right into the parking lot, aggressive, fast, a combat insertion. The rotor wash was violent. Cars rocked on their suspensions. A shopping cart flew across the lot like it weighed nothing. The rain became horizontal. The helicopter's wheels touched asphalt with a thud you could feel through the building's foundation, through your bones. The side door slid open before the rotors stopped spinning. 2 figures jumped out into the maelstrom, full tactical gear, multicam uniforms that had seen real use, not parade ground pretty, worn, faded in places. The kind of wear that comes from deserts and mountains, and places where people shoot at you. Drop leg holsters riding their thighs, communication headsets, ballistic vests with plates that could stop rifle rounds. These weren't medics coming to transport a patient. These were operators. The lead man was tall, 6'3", maybe 6'4", broad shoulders that came from years of carrying heavy packs over hostile terrain, thick beard, more gray than black. Master Sergeant rank patch visible on his chest. His name was Wyatt Garrison. 22 years in special operations, 3 wars, more firefights than he could count. The kind of man who moved through the world with absolute confidence because he'd been tested in ways most people couldn't imagine and had never failed. He scanned the emergency room entrance through the rain and rotor wash, left to right, threat assessment, target acquisition. Then he ran. Not jogged, ran, full sprint, boots hitting pavement hard enough to splash water 3 feet high, moving with purpose and urgency that made everything else in the world seem slow and insignificant, straight toward the sliding glass doors. Margaret stood under the awning, perfectly still, not frozen, waiting. The difference was everything. The automatic doors burst open. Garrison came through like a force of nature. Rain dripped from his gear. His face was hard, focused, the face of a man on a mission where failure meant death. His eyes swept the emergency room with practiced efficiency, past the terrified residents, past the shocked nurses, past Dr. Sterling, who stood with his mouth open like a fish drowning in air, past Vanessa, whose perfect makeup couldn't hide her confusion. Garrison's eyes found Margaret, locked on. Margaret Thorne. His voice cut through the roar of the helicopter like a scalpel through skin. Clear, authoritative, desperate in a way that military men rarely allow themselves to be. Margaret Thorne, we need the ghost. Every person in that emergency room turned, looked at the same place. At the quiet woman under the awning, the one with the loose scrubs and the gray hair and the defeated posture, the one they'd been calling slow, clumsy, incompetent. The maid in scrubs. Margaret didn't move for a long moment. Then something happened. Something visible, physical, like watching someone put on a suit of armor that had been invisible until it was needed. Her spine straightened. Her shoulders went back. Her chin came up, the slouch disappeared, the defeated posture vanished. In its place was something else entirely, something military, something dangerous, something that had been hiding behind soft words and lowered eyes and careful invisibility. She took a step forward, out from under the awning, into the rain. Water soaked through her scrubs instantly, plastered her hair to her skull. She didn't seem to notice. She looked at Sergeant Garrison, and for the first time in 3 months, Margaret Thorne looked like exactly what she was. Not a nurse, not a victim, a weapon. Dr. Sterling recovered first. "You can't land here," he shouted. He stepped toward Garrison, trying to assert authority, trying to regain control of his domain. "This is private property. This is a hospital. I'm calling the—" Garrison didn't even look at him. His eyes stayed locked on Margaret. "Commander Thorne," Garrison said. His voice was different now, respectful, but urgent, carrying the weight of life and death. "We need you." Margaret walked forward, through the rain, past the automatic doors, past Sterling. "Sergeant Garrison," she said. Her voice was different, too, not the soft monotone she'd used with Sterling, not the gentle warmth she'd used with Thomas Webb. This was command voice. The voice of someone who had given orders in places where hesitation meant death. The voice of someone who had sent men into danger and brought them home alive. "Sit rep," she said. "Situation report. Military speak. Automatic. Years of training and combat experience condensed into a single word." Garrison straightened even in the chaos. Even with the helicopter roaring behind him and the rain pouring down and half the ER staring at them, he responded to that voice the way a soldier responds to his commanding officer. Instantly. Completely. "It's Colonel Morrison, ma'am." Margaret's face changed, just for a second, a flicker of something that might have been pain or fear or old memories rising from deep water. Her jaw tightened, her eyes hardened. "Reaper," she said quietly. "What happened?" "Live fire training exercise. Partnered with an SAS unit near the coastline. Something went wrong. We don't know if it was a ricochet or a misfire or what, but he took 3 rounds." Garrison's jaw clenched. His voice got quieter, more desperate. The kind of desperation that comes from watching someone you respect bleed out and being powerless to stop it. 5.56 entered lower abdominal quadrant, clipped the hip bone and fragmented. He's got shrapnel near the spine and significant internal hemorrhage. Massive blood loss. The field medic is good, ma'am. Corporal Jenkins. Good hands, good head, but he's 22 and he's shaking. And Morrison— Garrison stopped, swallowed hard. "Morrison won't let anyone else touch him. He refused medevac to the VA. He refused the base hospital. He said—" Garrison looked directly into Margaret's eyes. "He said, find the ghost. If I'm going to die, I want her to be the one to tell me it's time." Silence. Just the rain. The dying roar of the helicopter as the rotors began to slow. The wail of car alarms. The sound of Margaret's own heartbeat in her ears. She closed her eyes, took one breath, deep, controlled. When she opened them again, something had changed. The last vestiges of the hospital nurse were gone. Standing in the rain was someone else entirely. Lieutenant Commander Margaret Thorne, call sign Ghost, Navy Cross recipient. The woman who had performed 2,347 surgeries in combat zones across 3 continents. The woman who brought people back from the dead so many times her soldiers started to believe she actually could. The woman who had saved Colonel James Morrison's life in a dusty Syrian street 6 years ago. "He's not going to die," Margaret said. Not a hope, not a wish. An order. A statement of fact delivered with absolute conviction. Behind them, Sterling finally found his voice again. "Now wait just a goddamn minute." He pushed through the crowd of residents, stepped out into the rain, his expensive shoes, his tailored scrubs, all of it getting soaked. "This is my emergency room. You can't just barge in here and—" Garrison turned, slowly. He looked at Sterling the way a wolf looks at a yapping dog, the way a combat veteran looks at a civilian who has never known real danger. The way a man who has killed people with his bare hands looks at someone who thinks a raised voice is intimidation. His hand moved to rest on the holster at his thigh. Not threatening, just there. A reminder of what he was, what he represented, what he was capable of. "Sir," Garrison said. His voice was perfectly polite, perfectly controlled, perfectly terrifying. "This is United States Navy business. I'm going to need you to step aside." Sterling's face went red, then white, then red again. "I don't care if you're the President of the United States. This woman has no authority here. She was just fired for gross negligence. I'm not asking, sir," Garrison said. Something in his tone made Sterling stop, made him take a step back. Because Wyatt Garrison wasn't some hospital administrator or clinic manager or bureaucrat with a clipboard. He was a man who had fought in Fallujah and Kandahar and Mosul. A man who had done violence in places that didn't appear on maps. A man who had killed enemy combatants when the situation required it and slept fine afterward because he knew the difference between necessary and evil, and that kind of man doesn't ask twice. Sterling shut up. Garrison turned back to Margaret. "Ma'am, I need an answer. Will you come?" Margaret looked past him. At the Black Seahawk, rain streaming down its armored skin, rotor blades still turning, still ready. She thought about Morrison, the man who had carried her out of a burning convoy when she'd been too injured to walk. The man who had stood between her and enemy fire in a dusty Syrian street while she worked. The man who had saved her life at least 3 times that she could count, and probably more that she couldn't. The man who was dying right now, bleeding out in some military hangar because he trusted her. Only her. "I'm not active duty anymore," Margaret said quietly. "I just lost my job. I have no authority, no license to practice in a civilian capacity. Nothing." "You're the only person he trusts, ma'am," Garrison said. "The only one who can save him." Margaret looked down at her wet scrubs, at the cheap fabric clinging to her skin, at the ID badge she'd left on the metal tray inside, at the life she'd tried to build out of quiet service and invisibility. Then she looked up at the helicopter, at the machine that represented everything she'd tried to leave behind. The war, the blood, the impossible choices, the weight of lives in her hands. "I need a flight suit," she said. Garrison grinned, relief flooding his bearded face. "On the bird, ma'am," he said. "Let's go." Margaret turned one last time, looked at Dr. Sterling standing in the rain, looking small, confused, powerless, all his authority stripped away by 2 words from a man in tactical gear. "Dr. Sterling," she said. He stared at her, mouth working, no sound coming out. "You were right about one thing," Margaret said. "What?" he managed. Margaret's eyes were cold, hard, the eyes of someone who had seen things Sterling couldn't imagine in his worst nightmares. The eyes of someone who had held dying men in her arms and told them they were going home when she knew they weren't. The eyes of someone who had made peace with violence because violence was sometimes the only answer. "I don't belong in your hospital," she said. Then she turned and ran. Not the careful, measured walk of the invisible nurse, not the slow, deliberate movements that conserved energy. A full sprint, athletic, powerful. The run of someone who had spent years in combat boots running toward danger instead of away from it. Running toward the sound of gunfire because that's where the wounded were. She reached the helicopter in seconds. Garrison helped her up into the open door. The noise inside was deafening, all-consuming. The roar of engines and the whoop-whoop-whoop of rotor blades beating air into submission. The door slid shut. The pilot didn't wait, didn't ask for confirmation or clearance or permission. The Seahawk lifted, fast, aggressive. A combat ascent, the kind that makes your stomach drop and your ears pop and reminds you that you're in a machine designed for war. In seconds they were above the hospital, above the parking lot, above the ant-sized figure of Dr. Sterling standing in the rain looking up with his mouth open. Then they banked hard and disappeared into the storm clouds. The interior of the MH-60 Seahawk was a world Margaret had thought she'd left behind. Steel and shadow. The smell of JP-8 fuel and gun oil, and the particular metallic tang of military equipment that never quite comes clean, no matter how many times you scrub it. Red tactical lights casting everything in crimson, making everyone look like they were already covered in blood. The noise was incredible. Even with the headset Garrison handed her, even with the foam cups pressed tight against her ears, the roar was omnipresent, bone deep, shaking her teeth in her skull, making conversation nearly impossible. But it was familiar. God, it was familiar. Margaret stripped off her wet scrubs without hesitation. Modesty was for civilians, for people who had never changed clothes in a plywood latrine while mortars fell outside, for people who had never done surgery in a tent while enemy rounds punched holes in the canvas above your head. Garrison turned his back anyway. Professional courtesy, the kind of small dignity that soldiers maintain even in the worst circumstances. He handed her the flight suit, olive drab, Nomex fabric, the kind that won't melt to your skin if you're caught in a fuel fire, the kind that's designed to give you a fighting chance if everything goes wrong. Margaret pulled it on, zipped it up to her neck. The fabric was stiff, new, smelled like factory packaging and potential. When she turned back around, something had completed, the transformation that started in the parking lot. Margaret Thorne, the fired nurse, was gone. In her place sat Lieutenant Commander Margaret Ghost Thorne, combat trauma specialist, Navy Cross recipient. The woman who had rewritten the field manuals on damage control resuscitation during the darkest days of the Desert Wars. ETA, she said into the headset microphone. Her voice was crisp, all business. The voice of someone who had coordinated medical evacuations under fire, who had triaged mass casualty events, who had made the decisions about who got treatment first and who had to wait, and sometimes who had to be left behind. 6 minutes, the pilot responded. His voice crackled through the headset. Naval Air Station, Hangar 4 has been converted to a trauma bay. Best we could do on short notice. Brief me, Margaret said to Garrison. He pulled out a tablet, swiped through information with practiced efficiency. Medical records, field reports, real-time vitals being transmitted from the ground team. Colonel James Morrison, age 50, Delta Force, 28 years of service, currently assigned to Joint Special Operations Command as a training advisor. Training exercise with SAS partner unit, live fire drill on the coast. We think a ricochet struck him 3 times, but we're not sure. Lower right quadrant. Garrison looked up. His face was grim, the face of a man who had seen too many friends die. The first round entered just above the right iliac crest, struck the hip bone and fragmented. We've got at least 3 pieces of shrapnel, maybe more. One is lodged approximately 2 millimeters from the L4 nerve root. If it shifts, he's paralyzed. Another piece nicked the common iliac artery. Margaret's jaw tightened, her hands clenched into fists. Common iliac artery, one of the major blood vessels supplying the lower body. A tear in that vessel was a death sentence without immediate intervention. Hemorrhage rate, she asked. Class 3 shock when we extracted him. BP 80 over 50. Heart rate 130. That was 20 minutes ago. He's gotten worse since then. Current vitals. Garrison checked his tablet. His face went pale. BP 75 over 45. Heart rate 140. Respiratory rate 28. Oxygen saturation 91%. And dropping. Margaret did the calculations in her head. Blood loss, shock progression, compensatory mechanisms failing, time. They were losing him. Blood products, she asked. 4 units O negative on site. Cell saver ready. We've got more blood coming, but it won't be there for another 15 minutes. Too long, Margaret said. He doesn't have 15 minutes. I know, Garrison said quietly. Surgical capability. We've got a civilian doctor, Dr. Eris, from the base clinic. He's trying to stabilize Morrison, but the colonel won't let him do anything invasive. Won't let him put in central lines. Won't let him start aggressive resuscitation. Just keeps saying to wait for Ghost. Stubborn bastard, Margaret muttered. Garrison smiled despite himself. Yes, ma'am. That's the Colonel. Margaret turned to look out the small porthole window. Rain streaked across the plexiglass. Below, the lights of the city were a blur, receding, being left behind. She thought about Morrison, thought about Syria, thought about the day she'd saved his life the first time. Aleppo, Syria. 6 years earlier, the convoy hit the IED at 1400 hours. Margaret was 34 years old, lieutenant commander, leading a Navy medical team attached to a Joint Special Operations Task Force. They'd been operating out of a forward base for 3 months, treating wounded, stabilizing casualties, saving lives in a city that was actively trying to kill them. The explosion flipped the lead Humvee onto its side. Margaret was in the second vehicle. She felt the shock wave through her bones, heard the scream of tearing metal, saw the fireball rise into the Syrian sky like a mushroom cloud in miniature. Her driver slammed the brakes. The Humvee skidded, stopped. "Contact front," someone screamed over the radio. "Contact front! Contact front! We're taking fire." Automatic weapons fire. The distinct crack of AK-47s. The heavier, deeper thump of a PKM machine gun. Rounds hitting the armored vehicles, sparking, ricocheting. The convoy was pinned. Ambush. Margaret grabbed her medical pack. 40 pounds of trauma supplies. Everything she might need to keep someone alive in the worst possible circumstances. Threw open the door. "Commander, stay in the vehicle," her senior corpsman yelled. "Stay." She ignored him. Jumped out. Hit the dirt. Ran toward the burning Humvee. Bullets hit the ground around her feet, kicked up little geysers of dust. She didn't slow down. Didn't think about the danger. Just ran. There were men in that vehicle. Her men. The door was jammed, bent metal. She braced her foot against the frame and pulled. Once, twice, 3 times. Using every ounce of strength she had, it gave. 2 soldiers fell out, unconscious, bleeding. She grabbed the first one by his vest and dragged him, away from the fire, into cover behind a concrete barrier, went back for the second. Dragged him too. The enemy fire was intensifying, rounds cracking overhead, hitting the barrier, spraying concrete dust. That's when she saw him. Colonel James Morrison, Delta Force, the ground commander for the operation. The man who planned the missions and led from the front and never asked his soldiers to do anything he wouldn't do himself. He was 44 then, already gray, face like carved granite, eyes that had seen too much but never looked away. He was providing covering fire, standing in the open, drawing enemy attention away from the wounded. His M4 rifle barking in controlled 3-round bursts. Professional, disciplined. Then he went down, hard. Margaret saw the blood spray, saw him grab his thigh, saw him try to stand and fail. Femoral artery. She knew it immediately, knew what it meant. Without a tourniquet, without pressure, he had minutes, maybe less. She ran, across open ground, through enemy fire, her medical pack bouncing against her back, her boots pounding dirt. Bullets snapped past her head, so close she could feel the displacement of air, so close she could hear the supersonic crack. She didn't stop. Reached Morrison, dropped to her knees beside him. His face was pale, eyes wide, but focused. Even bleeding to death, the man was calm, in control. "Lieutenant," he said. His voice was steady, professional. "I need you to—" He didn't finish. His eyes rolled back. His body went slack. Margaret ripped open his pants leg. Blood pulsed from the wound in rhythm with his heartbeat, bright red, arterial, the worst kind. She jammed her thumb into the wound, found the artery by feel, clamped down hard. The bleeding slowed, but didn't stop. "Garrison!" she screamed. Wyatt Garrison was a staff sergeant then, younger, less gray, but just as competent. "Pressure here, now!" Garrison scrambled over, bullets hitting the ground around them. He put his hands where hers had been, pressed down hard. Margaret pulled her trauma pack around, grabbed the tourniquet, applied it high on Morrison's thigh, as high as it would go, cranked it tight. The rod turned. The strap tightened. The pressure built. The pulsing blood slowed, stopped, but he was still bleeding internally. The artery was torn, not just nicked. "We need to move him," Garrison yelled. Mortars were falling now. The enemy had their range. Adjusting fire. Getting closer. "Not yet," Margaret said. She pulled out her suture kit. Opened it with bloody fingers. "Ma'am, we don't have time." "Make time," she said. Her hands moved fast. Faster than she'd ever worked before. She made an incision, extended the wound, found the torn artery, clamped it, sutured it closed with 7 precise stitches, all while mortars fell, all while bullets cracked overhead, all while Garrison and 3 other soldiers formed a protective circle around them, returning fire, keeping the enemy at bay. 2 minutes. That's how long it took. 2 minutes of the most precise, perfect surgical work she'd ever done, under fire, in the dirt, with a man's life measured in heartbeats. When she finished, Morrison's eyes opened. He looked at her, focused, clear. "Don't let me die in this shithole," he said. "Not today, Reaper," Margaret said. She was already packing up her gear. "Not on my watch." They carried him back, got him to the convoy, got him evacuated to the field hospital, then to Germany, then to Walter Reed. He survived. 3 weeks later, Morrison walked into the field hospital on crutches, found Margaret in the middle of treating a soldier with a sucking chest wound, waited until she was done. When she finally noticed him standing there, she smiled. "You're supposed to be in Maryland," she said. "I am," Morrison said. "Officially. But I had something to say, and I needed to say it in person." He stepped closer, grabbed her hand. "If I ever need saving again," he said quietly, "I want you. Nobody else, just you. Promise me." Margaret looked at his hand, at the scars on his knuckles, at the IV bruises on his arm, at the man who had almost died because he was protecting her soldiers. "I promise," she said. Morrison grinned. "Good. Now don't make a habit of having to keep that promise ghost." "Don't make a habit of getting shot, Colonel." Morrison's grin widened. "No promises." Present. Seahawk interior. Margaret came back to herself. The memory faded, dissolved back into the past where it belonged. She was in the helicopter, racing through the storm, racing toward Morrison. Who was dying? Who had asked for her? Only her. "Ma'am?" Garrison was looking at her, concerned. Margaret realized she'd been silent for almost a minute, lost in the past. "I'm fine," she said. "Continue the brief." Garrison nodded. "Corporal Jenkins is the field medic on site. Like I said, 22 years old. Good kid, good hands. But he is scared. Morrison's fading in and out of consciousness, refusing general anesthesia until you arrive. Says he wants to be awake when you get there." "Vitals now." Garrison checked his tablet again. His face went grim. "BP holding at 70/40, heart rate 145, respiratory rate 30, oxygen saturation 89%. Margaret's hands clenched into fists. He was getting worse. Despite everything the field medic was doing, despite the blood products, despite the pressure dressings and the medications, they were losing him. "Can we shave 2 minutes off the ETA?" Margaret asked. Garrison leaned forward, tapped the pilot's shoulder. "How fast can this bird go?" The pilot glanced back, saw Margaret's face, saw the look in her eyes, the look of someone who had made a promise and intended to keep it. "Hold on," he said. The Seahawk tilted forward. The engine screamed. The world outside the windows became a blur of rain and darkness and speed. They were racing death. And death had a head start. But Margaret Thorne had never lost a race that mattered. Not yet. Not today. The helicopter punched through the cloud layer. Below, Margaret could see the Naval Air Station. Runways lit up like neon veins cutting through the darkness. Hangar lights creating pools of yellow on wet concrete. Hangar 4 was lit up brighter than the rest. Every light on. Vehicles parked outside. An ambulance. 2 Humvees. People waiting. The Seahawk came in fast. Too fast for a normal landing. The kind of approach that would make civilian pilots nervous, make passengers grip their armrests. But this wasn't a civilian flight. The pilot flared hard. Aggressive combat landing, the kind designed to get troops on the ground fast in hostile territory, the kind that makes your stomach drop and your teeth clench. The wheels hit concrete with a bone-jarring thud. "Go, go, go!" Garrison shouted. The side door flew open before the rotors fully stopped. Margaret didn't hesitate. She jumped out, hit the ground running, rain in her face. Wind from the rotor blades tearing at her flight suit, the roar of the helicopter behind her. She ran toward the hangar, 50 yards, 40, 30. The door was open, harsh halogen lights inside, industrial, the smell of jet fuel and antiseptic and blood. She burst through. And there, in the center of the space on a field gurney, surrounded by medical equipment and worried faces, was Colonel James Morrison, pale, sweating, IV lines running into both arms, blood-soaked bandages wrapped around his abdomen, an oxygen mask over his face, but his eyes were open. He saw her. A weak smile pulled at his lips. "Took you," he managed. His voice was barely a whisper, strained. Long enough. Margaret was at his side in 3 steps. She grabbed his wrist, felt for the radial pulse, thready, barely there, racing like a hummingbird's wings. She looked at his face, at the gray pallor, at the sweat beading on his forehead, at the cyanosis starting at his lips. He was dying. Right here, right now. "Traffic was bad, Reaper," she said. Her voice was steady, calm, professional, giving him something to focus on besides the fact that he was bleeding to death. "Had to take out the trash first." Morrison's smile widened just a fraction. "That's my girl," he breathed. Then his eyes closed. The monitor started screaming, high-pitched, urgent. His heart was failing. The monitor screamed, a high-pitched wail that cut through the industrial noise of Hangar 4 like a knife through flesh. The kind of sound that makes medical professionals move without thinking, without hesitation. The sound of a human heart giving up. Margaret didn't freeze. Freezing was for people who had options, for people who could afford hesitation, for people who weren't watching someone they cared about die. She moved. "Ultrasound," she barked. Her voice cut through the chaos, command voice, the voice that made people obey. "Fast exam. Now." A young corporal scrambled forward with the portable ultrasound machine. His hands were shaking. His face was pale, baby-faced. Couldn't be more than 22, watching a colonel die and knowing he didn't have the skills to stop it. This had to be Jenkins. Margaret grabbed the wand from him, squeezed gel onto Morrison's abdomen. The gel was cold. Morrison flinched even in his semi-conscious state. She pressed the probe against his skin. The screen flickered to life. Black space where there shouldn't be black space. Dark fluid filling the abdominal cavity like ink in water. Free-floating blood, lots of it. Internal hemorrhage, massive. "How much blood has he lost?" Margaret asked. Her voice was clinical, detached. The only way to stay functional when someone you cared about was dying in front of you. "We've pushed 4 units, Jenkins said. His voice cracked. "But he's still dropping. BP is 65/35. Heart rate 158. Margaret moved the probe. Scanning, assessing, looking for the source. The liver looked intact, spleen intact, kidneys intact. But there, the common iliac artery, the major blood vessel supplying the lower extremities, a jagged tear in the vessel wall, blood pulsing out with every heartbeat, flooding the peritoneal cavity, drowning him from the inside. And next to it, wedged against the lumbar vertebrae like a piece of shrapnel waiting to sever the spinal cord, was the fragment. 2 millimeters. 2 millimeters from turning James Morrison into a paraplegic. From taking away his ability to walk, to run, to lead men into combat, to be the warrior he'd spent his entire adult life becoming, if he lived long enough for that to matter. "We need to open him," Margaret said. Her voice was steady, matter-of-fact, like she was discussing the weather. "Here, now." A man in a white coat stepped forward, mid-50s, balding, soft around the middle. The kind of soft that came from years behind a desk instead of in an operating room. His name tag read, Dr. Aris, Base Clinic. "I'm Dr. Aris," he said. His voice shook. "I'm the ranking medical officer on base. We should wait for the medevac to Walter Reed. We don't have a sterile operating theater here. The infection risk alone—" Margaret looked at him. Just looked at him. Dr. Aris stopped talking, because the woman looking at him wasn't someone who gave a damn about protocol or infection risk or career advancement. This was someone who had performed surgery in shot-up buildings with nothing but a headlamp and willpower. Someone who had saved lives while mortars fell and buildings burned and the world tried to kill her. Someone who had looked death in the face so many times they were on a first-name basis. "Infection won't kill him," Margaret said quietly, "because he'll be dead from blood loss in 3 minutes." She turned to Jenkins. "I need you to listen very carefully, Corporal. Can you do that?" Jenkins nodded, swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed. "Get me a scalpel, number 10 blade, trauma shears, retractors, vascular clamps, 5-O-proline suture, microforceps. And I need that cell saver operational. We're going to need every drop of blood we can recycle." "Yes, ma'am." Jenkins moved, fast, efficient. Following orders helped, gave him something to do besides watch a man die. Margaret turned to Garrison. "I need Morrison sedated, ketamine and propofol, standard dosing for combat anesthesia." "Ma'am, he said he wanted to be awake." "He's not going to want to be awake for this," Margaret said. Her voice was gentle but firm. "Trust me on that, Sergeant." Garrison moved to Morrison's side, leaned down close, spoke quietly. "Colonel," he said softly, "Ghost is here. She's going to fix you up. But you need to let us put you under. You understand?" Morrison's eyes flickered open, unfocused, glassy. Pain and blood loss doing their work. He looked at Margaret, tried to speak. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Margaret took his hand, squeezed it. His fingers were cold, clammy, shock. "Jim," she said quietly, using his first name, something she rarely did. "You're going to wake up sore, but you're going to wake up. Do you trust me?" Morrison's fingers tightened around hers, weak, barely any strength left, but the grip was there. "With my life, Ghost," he managed to whisper, "always." "Then sleep," Margaret said. "I've got you." She nodded to Jenkins. "Push the drugs." The medication went in through the IV ketamine first, then propofol. Within seconds, Morrison's eyes rolled back. His body went slack. The tension left his face, peaceful. The monitor continued its frantic beeping, but his face was calm now, unaware of the battle being fought to keep him alive. Margaret released his hand, pulled on gloves. The latex snapped tight, picked up the scalpel, looked at the team assembled around her. Jenkins, Garrison, Dr. Aris, 2 other medics whose names she didn't know. "Let's get to work," she said. The incision was clean, one smooth motion, scalpel through skin and subcutaneous tissue and fascia and muscle, from xiphoid process to pubic symphysis, a midline laparotomy, the kind of incision that gives you access to everything important in the abdomen. Blood welled up immediately, dark, angry, the color of old rust mixed with fresh death. "Suction," Margaret commanded. Jenkins had the Yankauer suction catheter ready. He moved in, started clearing the field. The suction made a wet gurgling sound as it pulled blood and fluid out of the abdominal cavity. More blood, too much blood. Years of training took over. Margaret's hands moved without conscious thought. She packed the wound with surgical laps, gauze pads that soaked up blood like sponges, threw them aside when they were saturated, packed more. "Retractors," she said. "Doctor." Aris handed them over. His hands were steadier now. Having a task helped, gave him something to do besides panic. Margaret spread the abdominal cavity open. The Balfour retractor clicked into place, held the wound open, gave her access. And there it was, the source. The common iliac artery, a jagged tear in the vessel wall about 2 centimeters long, blood pulsing out in rhythm with Morrison's failing heart. "Clamp," Margaret said. The metal instrument hit her palm. She reached in. Her hands disappeared into Morrison's abdomen, into blood and tissue and the warm, wet reality of the human body trying desperately not to die. She felt for the artery, found it, slippery, pulsing, traced it up to the tear, placed the clamp proximal to the injury, squeezed. The handles clicked together, the jaws bit down on the artery. The immediate gush of blood stopped. The monitors began to settle. Not good, not stable, but better. Responding. "BP is coming up," Jenkins said, relief flooding his young voice. 70/40, 75/45. "Don't celebrate yet," Margaret said. Her eyes never left the surgical field. "We're just getting started." She looked at the fragment. Embedded in the soft tissue adjacent to the fourth lumbar vertebra, wedged against the nerve root like a knife waiting to fall, like a bomb waiting to go off. "I need to remove that fragment," Margaret said. "But if I move it wrong, if I nick that nerve root, he's paralyzed from the waist down for the rest of his life." Silence in the hangar, just the beep of monitors, the hum of the cell saver machine recycling Morrison's blood, the distant sound of rain on metal. "There's a technique we can use," Margaret said. REBOA, resuscitative endovascular balloon occlusion of the aorta, relatively new, designed for battlefield use. I helped develop the protocol. Dr. Aris blinked. "I've read about that in the journals, but I've never seen it performed outside of a major trauma center." "You're about to," Margaret said. She looked at Jenkins. "I need femoral access, right side. Introduce a 7 French sheath. And I need a timer set for 3 minutes. Once I inflate the balloon, we have exactly 3 minutes before ischemic tissue damage becomes irreversible. After 3 minutes, his legs start to die." Jenkins nodded. His hands were steadier now, having a clear task, a specific goal. He prepped the groin, found the femoral artery by palpation, introduced the needle, thread the wire, slid the sheath in. Margaret took the balloon catheter, thread it through the sheath, up through the femoral artery, up through the external iliac, the common iliac, into the abdominal aorta. She watched the catheter advance on the portable fluoroscopy unit. Up, up, up. "Balloon at the supraceliac aorta," she said. "Ready to inflate." She looked at the team. "When I inflate this balloon, it's going to completely occlude blood flow to everything below the diaphragm. His blood pressure will spike. His heart rate will drop. His lower extremities will start to die. We have 3 minutes to fix the artery, remove the fragment, and deflate. 3 minutes, not 4, not 3.5, 3. Everyone understand?" Nods around the room. "Jenkins, start the timer on my mark." Jenkins's finger hovered over the button. Margaret took a breath. Mark. She inflated the balloon. The timer started. 300259 258, tick, tick, tick. The sound of time running out. With the balloon inflated, the surgical field transformed. No more pulsing blood, no more constant flood. The bleeding stopped. Margaret could see. The tear in the artery, clear now. About 2 centimeters long. Irregular edges. The fragment. Copper jacket from a 5.56 round. Deformed from impact. Fragmented. Sharp edges that could shred tissue if she wasn't careful. "Microforceps," she said. The delicate instrument appeared in her hand. She reached in, carefully, so carefully. The fragment was embedded deep, surrounded by inflamed tissue. The body's attempt to wall off the foreign object, to protect itself from further damage. She began to dissect. Carefully separating tissue, exposing the fragment, working around the nerve root that was so close. So dangerously close, to 15-2, 14-2, 13. Every movement had to be precise, controlled. One wrong move and Morrison would never walk again. One slip and the nerve would be severed. "Talk to me about vitals," Margaret said. Her voice was calm, steady, like she was discussing lunch plans instead of fighting death. "Heart rate 110, Jenkins reported. BP 120 over 70. The balloon is working. Oxygen sat 98%. Good. Keep watching. Margaret continued working. The fragment was larger than it looked on the ultrasound, not just one piece, 3, all clustered together. All dangerous. She got the forceps around the first piece, gripped. 147, 146, 145. This is the part where nobody breathes, Margaret said. The room went silent, everyone holding their breath, waiting. She began to pull, slow, controlled, watching the nerve root, watching for any sign of damage, any bleeding, any tear. The first fragment moved. 1 millimeter, 2. It was coming free. 128, 127, 126. The fragment came out. She dropped it in the kidney dish with a metallic clink. 2 more to go. She worked faster now. Time was running out, but not so fast that she made mistakes. Second fragment, smaller, easier, out. 0, 58, 0, 57, 0, 56. Third fragment, the dangerous one, the one touching the nerve root. Margaret's hands were perfectly steady. Years of training, years of combat surgery, years of bringing people back from the edge of death. All of it concentrated into this moment, this single moment where everything mattered. She gripped the fragment, began to pull, felt it resist, felt the tissue holding on. She adjusted her angle, pulled again. It shifted. 0, 34, 0, 33, 0, 32. Come on, come on. The fragment came free, clear of the nerve root, clear of the vertebrae, out. All fragments removed, Margaret said. Her voice was still calm, still professional, like her heart wasn't hammering in her chest. Nerve root intact, no visible damage. She dropped the final fragment into the dish. 0, 19, 0, 18, 0, 17. Now the artery, she said. She removed the vascular clamp. Blood began to flow again, but slower now. Manageable. She could see the tear clearly. She threaded the needle. 5-O-Proline, blue suture material designed for vascular repair. Strong, non-reactive, the best. Her hands moved in a rhythm older than medicine itself, in and out, pulling tissue together, making whole what was broken, running stitch, continuous, each bite of the needle perfect, each loop of suture tight, but not too tight. 009, 008, 007, final stitch. She tied it off. Triple throw, surgeon's knot, secure. Check the repair. No leakage. The artery wall was intact, sealed. Deflating balloon, she said. 003, 002. She released the balloon, pulled the catheter back, removed it. 001. The timer hit 0 and stopped. Blood flowed through the repaired artery, strong, steady, normal. The monitors stabilized, heart rate dropping, down to 95, 88, 82, blood pressure holding, 100 over 60, 105 over 65, 110 over 70, oxygen saturation 99%. Morrison's color was returning, the gray pallor fading, pink spreading across his skin like sunrise breaking over a dark horizon. "He's stabilizing," Jenkins whispered, like he was afraid to say it too loud, afraid to jinx it. Margaret stood back for just a moment, looked at the monitors, at the stable vitals, at the man who had been dying and was now against all odds going to live. Then she got back to work, because the surgery wasn't over until it was over. She began to close the abdomen, layer by layer, peritoneum first, then fascia, then muscle, subcutaneous tissue, skin, precise, perfect. The same care she gave every stitch, whether it was the first or the last, whether anyone was watching or not. When she was done, she stripped off her gloves. They hit the trash can with a snap. She walked to the sink in the corner, scrubbed her hands, scrubbed her forearms. The water ran red, then pink, then clear. In the reflection of the polished metal backsplash, she could see herself, blood on her face, splattered across her cheeks, in her hair, across the olive flight suit. She looked like she'd been to war. In a way she had. Behind her, Morrison stirred. His eyes flickered open, unfocused, confused. "Ghost!" His voice was hoarse, rough from the endotracheal tube. Margaret turned, walked back to his side. "Welcome back, Reaper," she said. She smiled, a real smile. "You're going to be fine." Morrison looked at the ceiling, at the industrial lights, at the hangar around him, trying to orient himself. "Did we?" He swallowed. "Did we make it?" "We made it," Margaret said. "You're stable. All the fragments are out. Artery is repaired. No nerve damage. You're going to walk out of here." Morrison closed his eyes, relief washing over his face. "I knew you'd pull me through," he whispered. Then he drifted off again, not unconscious, just exhausted, his body demanding rest, demanding time to heal. Margaret checked his vitals one more time. Everything stable, everything good. She turned to Jenkins. "Good work, Corporal. You kept him alive long enough for me to get here. That's all that mattered." Jenkins' eyes went wide. "Ma'am, I didn't do anything. That was all you. I've never seen anything like that." "You did everything right," Margaret said. "Don't sell yourself short." Sergeant Garrison slumped against the wall, put his head in his hands, the adrenaline fading, the fear and stress of the past hour catching up with him. Dr. Eris stared at Margaret like she'd just walked on water. "That was—" he started. Stopped. Started again. "I've been practicing medicine for 26 years. I've never seen surgery performed like that. The speed, the precision, the technique, that REBOA procedure. I've only read about it in journals, and you just did it, in a hangar, with field equipment." Margaret didn't respond. She was already moving to the next task. Check the IV drips, adjust the medication rates, make sure Morrison stayed stable. Work was never done. A phone rang. Garrison pulled a satellite phone from his tactical vest, looked at the screen. His eyebrows went up. "Ma'am," he said, "it's Admiral Caldwell, from the Pentagon." Margaret took the phone. "Commander Thorne," she said. "Commander." The voice on the other end was deep, authoritative, the voice of a man with 2 stars and 30 years of command experience. "Status report. Colonel Morrison is stable, sir. Fragments removed. Artery repaired. No nerve damage. He'll need transport to Walter Reed for observation and recovery, but he's out of immediate danger. I estimate 2 hours before he's ready for transport." "Outstanding work, Commander. I knew you'd pull him through." A pause. "Now," Admiral Caldwell said. His tone changed, became harder. "About Mercy General Hospital." Margaret's jaw tightened. "Sir, Sergeant Garrison briefed me on the situation. The facility that terminated your employment. The physician who publicly humiliated you. The hostile work environment." Another pause. "That hospital receives significant funding from Navy medical research grants. $4.2 million annually. I believe it's time we conducted a site visit to ensure those funds are being properly utilized." Margaret could hear the steel in his voice, the kind of steel that came from decades of command, from making decisions that affected thousands of lives. "Sir, I don't think that's necessary." "I disagree, Commander. When one of our decorated combat veterans is mistreated by a facility receiving federal funding, that becomes a matter of institutional concern." Admiral Caldwell's voice softened slightly. "Get the helicopter ready," he said. "I'll meet you at Mercy General in 90 minutes. We're going to have a conversation with Dr. Sterling." The line went dead. Margaret handed the phone back to Garrison. "Looks like we're going back," she said. Garrison grinned, a fierce, predatory grin. "Good," he said. "I want to see that pompous bastard's face when he realizes who you really are." Margaret looked at Morrison, at the man sleeping peacefully now, at the man she'd just saved for the second time. She thought about Sterling, about Vanessa, about 3 months of humiliation and silence and careful invisibility, about being told she was too slow, too old, too incompetent, about being fired for saving a life. She smiled. "Yeah," she said quietly, "me too." The rain had stopped by the time they returned to Mercy General, 4:30 in the morning, that dead hour when the world is caught between night and day, when even the emergency room gets quiet. The Black Seahawk descended from clearing skies. This time it landed on the helipad on the roof. Official, authorized, unstoppable. The doors opened. Margaret stepped out first, still in the blood-stained flight suit, hair pulled back, face streaked with dried blood. She looked like a warrior returning from battle. Behind her came Colonel Morrison, in a wheelchair. Garrison pushing, alert now, pale but alive. IV line running into his arm. Fresh bandages visible beneath his half-open uniform jacket. Behind them 4 Marines in dress blues, crisp, perfect. The kind of uniform presence that makes civilians straighten up and pay attention. And finally Admiral Preston Caldwell, 2 stars gleaming on his shoulders even in the pre-dawn darkness. Ribbons covering his chest. 30 years of service, 30 years of command. The kind of presence that filled a room just by entering it. They took the elevator down. The doors opened onto the emergency room floor. The night shift was winding down. A few nurses at the station, residents finishing charts, the usual end-of-shift routine. Then they saw the Marines. Everything stopped. Pens froze mid-word. Conversations died. Everyone stared. Dr. Sterling was still there. He hadn't gone home. Too wired, too angry, too busy trying to control the narrative, trying to spin the story of the crazy nurse who assaulted a patient and got what she deserved. He was on his phone when the elevator doors opened. He looked up, saw Margaret. The phone slipped from his hand, clattered on the floor. His face went white. Margaret didn't look at him. Not yet. She walked straight past the nurses' station, past the residents who were staring, past Vanessa Cole, whose perfect makeup couldn't hide the fear in her eyes. She walked to bed 4. Thomas Webb was awake, sitting up, looking better. The IV drip she'd adjusted before she left was doing its job, color in his face, clarity in his eyes. "You came back," Thomas said. His voice was rough but surprised, pleased. "I promised I'd finish your care plan," Margaret said. She checked his vitals. Everything stable, everything improving. Colonel Morrison rolled his wheelchair up beside the bed, extended his hand. "Mr. Webb," Morrison said. "Colonel James Morrison, United States Delta Force." Thomas's eyes went wide. His hands shook as he clasped Morrison's hand. "Corporal Thomas Webb, sir," he managed. "Combat engineer, 1st Armored Division, Desert Storm, 1991. Morrison's grip was firm despite his injuries. "Corporal," he said, "Commander Thorne told me you showed her respect, showed her kindness, when the people in this building treated her like she was invisible." Morrison leaned forward. "A soldier never forgets his brothers," he said. "Thank you for taking care of my medic." Thomas's eyes filled with tears. "She's the good one, sir," he whispered. "Too good for this place." "I know," Morrison said. Behind them Sterling finally found his voice. "This is ridiculous." He pushed through the crowd of residents, stepped into the open space. His expensive shoes, his tailored scrubs, his perfect hair disheveled now, his face red with rage. "This is a hospital." His voice was shrill, desperate. "Not some military parade ground. I don't care who you people are or what medals she has. This woman violated protocol. She endangered a patient. She performed an unauthorized procedure, and I had every right to—" "Dr. Sterling." Admiral Caldwell's voice cut through the noise like a scalpel. He stepped forward slowly, deliberately. 2 stars catching the fluorescent light. 30 years of authority radiating from him like heat. "I'm Rear Admiral Preston Caldwell, United States Navy." Sterling tried to maintain his composure, tried to keep the upper hand. "Admiral, with all due respect, this is a civilian facility. This woman has no authority here. She was terminated for gross negligence. She performed an invasive medical procedure without authorization that could have—" "Let me stop you there, Doctor." Caldwell opened a folder he'd been carrying. "I'd like to share some information with you about the woman you terminated." He began to read. Margaret Elizabeth Thorne, Lieutenant Commander, United States Navy Medical Corps, retired with honors. Sterling's face went pale. Medical degree from Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. Graduated first in her class, 2014. Residency in emergency medicine at Harvard Medical School. Fellowship in trauma surgery at Massachusetts General Hospital. The room was completely silent now. Every resident, every nurse, every patient who could hear, all listening. Double board certified in emergency medicine and trauma surgery. Caldwell looked up from the folder. She's not just a nurse, Dr. Sterling. Though I want to be very clear, being a nurse is nothing to be ashamed of. Nurses are the backbone of medicine, the real heroes of healthcare. He paused. But Commander Thorne holds both credentials, RN and MD. Dr. Kira Brennan spoke up from the back of the crowd. Her voice was quiet but clear. She's a doctor. Margaret turned, looked at Brennan. I am, Margaret said. But I'm a nurse first, Kira. That's what I chose to be here. That's what I wanted. She stepped toward Sterling. I wanted to be at the bedside, Margaret said. Her voice was calm, strong, no longer the soft monotone of the invisible nurse. I wanted to care for patients, to do the small things that matter, to hold hands, to listen, to be present. She looked Sterling in the eye. I didn't want to play God. I didn't want to build an empire. I didn't want to humiliate residents or belittle nurses or treat people like they were beneath me. She stepped closer. But you, Ryan, you treated competence as a threat. You treated experience as insubordination. You put your ego before patient care. She gestured toward the ICU. John Doe, the patient in Bay 1, the one I saved with that needle decompression. He's alive right now because I acted. If I'd followed your precious protocol, if I'd waited for your resident to stop shaking, he'd be dead. She let that sink in. Is your ego worth more than his life? Sterling's mouth opened, closed. No words came out. Admiral Caldwell continued reading. 4 combat tours. Iraq 2012 to 2013. Syria 2015 to 2016. Afghanistan 2017 to 2018. And classified operations I'm not at liberty to discuss. He looked at Sterling. 2,347 documented surgical procedures in combat zones, 98.9% survival rate. She brought people back from the dead, Dr. Sterling, while under fire, while mortars fell, while the world tried to kill her. Caldwell closed the folder. Recipient of the Navy Cross. That's the second highest military decoration for Valor Doctor, awarded for extraordinary heroism in combat against an armed enemy. He stepped closer to Sterling. Her call sign was Ghost, because her soldiers said she could resurrect the dead. Complete silence. Sterling was shaking his head, his face cycling through emotions. Disbelief, anger, fear. That's impossible, he stammered. She applied as a nurse. She mopped floors. She couldn't even... She was slow. She was being kind, Admiral Caldwell said quietly. She was serving without ego, without needing recognition or glory, just doing the work because it needed to be done. He leaned in. While you were building your reputation at her expense, she was saving lives in places you can't pronounce. While you were publishing papers about trauma care, she was performing that care under mortar fire. While you were playing God in a clean, safe emergency room, she was God in a dirty tent with bullets punching holes in the canvas. Sterling had no response. The hospital director, Lawrence Pinter, arrived, disheveled, hastily dressed. He'd been called at home by the night supervisor, rushed over in wrinkled clothes, holding his phone like a weapon. Dr. Sterling, Pinter said. His voice was cold, professional, the voice of a man making a decision he should have made months ago. Effective immediately, you are suspended pending investigation by the medical board. You can't, Sterling started. I can, Pinter said. The board received 23 formal complaints tonight, from residents, from nurses, from staff who've been too afraid to speak up until now. Your behavior has created a hostile work environment. You've violated hospital policy. You've endangered patient care." He held up his phone. "The viral video of your behavior has been seen by 32 million people. Our donors are threatening to pull funding. Senator Marks called me personally. She's furious that her constituent," he gestured to Margaret, "a decorated war hero, was treated this way in a facility receiving federal grants." Pinter looked at Admiral Caldwell. "Admiral, I want to apologize on behalf of Mercy General for—" "Your apology is noted," Caldwell said, "but insufficient." He turned to address the room, made sure everyone was listening. "The United States Navy is withdrawing all funding from Mercy General Hospital, effective immediately. $4.2 million in research grants, training programs, and equipment subsidies. Gone." Gasps from the assembled staff. That was a significant portion of the hospital's operating budget. "However," Caldwell continued, "we are establishing a new facility, the Morrison Thorne Center for Combat and Civilian Trauma Medicine." He looked at Margaret and Morrison. "A partnership between military and civilian health care, focused on training the next generation of trauma specialists, teaching them that competence matters more than ego, that every member of the team from surgeon to janitor deserves respect and dignity." He smiled. "Dr. Margaret Thorne will serve as Director of Trauma Surgery." Morrison spoke up from his wheelchair. His voice was weak but clear. "Your name goes first, Ghost," he said. "You earned it." Sterling looked around, looking for support, for someone to defend him, for validation that he was right and they were wrong. He found nothing. The residents were looking at Margaret with something between awe and shame. Shame that they'd laughed when Sterling mocked her. Shame that they hadn't spoken up. The nurses were smiling. Relief on their faces, years of abuse finally ending. Even Vanessa was staring at the floor, her perfect confidence shattered. Pinter nodded to the security guards. "Escort Dr. Sterling from the building," he said. "He's not to return without written authorization from the board." 2 guards stepped forward. Sterling backed away. "You can't do this. I built this ER. I made this trauma center. What it is, I am Mercy General." "Not anymore," Margaret said quietly. They led him away, through the automatic doors, past the gawking patients in the waiting room, out into the parking lot, into the early morning light. Gone. And as the doors closed behind him, Margaret felt something she hadn't felt in 3 months. Peace. 6 months later, the Morrison Thorne Center for Combat and Civilian Trauma Medicine opened on a brilliant spring morning. The building was beautiful, modern. Clean lines and lots of glass, designed with input from nurses and doctors and patients. Every detail considered, every space optimized not for prestige but for actual patient care. Margaret stood at the podium for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. She wore a white coat, crisp, clean, perfectly tailored. The embroidery on the chest read, "Margaret Thorne, M.D.R.N., Director of Trauma Surgery." In the front row sat Colonel Morrison, fully recovered, back on active duty. He'd made the flight from Fort Bragg just for this. Sitting next to him was Sergeant Garrison, uncomfortable in dress blues but grinning like a proud father. Next to Garrison sat Thomas Webb, clean-shaven, hair trimmed, wearing a decent suit that actually fit, 8 months sober, working at the center as Director of Patient Advocacy, helping veterans navigate the healthcare system, helping them find housing, jobs, hope. He had his own apartment now, a small studio, but it was his. He talked to his daughter again. She'd forgiven him. They had dinner once a week. Margaret looked out at the crowd. Media, local politicians, donors, but most importantly the staff, the nurses and doctors she'd hired away from Mercy General, the residents who'd been brave enough to file complaints against Sterling, the people who deserved a second chance in a place that valued them. Dr. Kira Brennan sat in the second row, Deputy Director of Trauma, confident now, strong, free from Sterling's abuse. She'd published 2 papers on trauma care in the past 6 months, was being courted by major medical journals for editorial positions. Margaret cleared her throat. The crowd went quiet. "They called me just a nurse," she began. Her voice carried across the courtyard, clear, strong, as if that were an insult, as if caring for the sick, cleaning wounds, holding the hands of the dying were somehow lesser work. She paused, let the words sink in. "In the field I learned something very simple. Rank doesn't stop a bleed. Ego doesn't restart a heart. Credentials don't comfort a dying patient." She looked at the staff assembled behind her. "The only thing that matters is the person next to you. The only thing that matters is the mission. Saving lives, alleviating suffering, being present when people need us most." She gestured to the building behind her. "We built this center on one principle. No one is invisible. From the director to the janitor, we are one team. We are one mission." She smiled. "We save lives, together." The applause started slow, then built, then erupted into a standing ovation. Morrison let out a thunderous "Hoorah!" that made several politicians jump. Margaret laughed, a real laugh, full and genuine. On the screen behind her, statistics appeared. Morrison Thorne Center. 6-month report, survival rate, 31% increase over regional average, staff satisfaction, 89%, industry average, 61%, veterans employed 47, patient advocates, counselors support staff, combat medics trained 120 annually, published research papers, 8, patient satisfaction, 96%. Then came the updates. Where are they now? Dr. Ryan Sterling now performs Botox injections and dermal fillers at Sunglow Med Spa, located in a strip mall 47 minutes outside the city. His hands shake when he holds the needle. His last Google review, 2.3 stars. A patient wrote, "He seemed distracted and kept talking about how he used to be chief of surgery somewhere. Botox was uneven. Would not recommend." Dr. Kira Brennan, Deputy Director of Trauma, Morrison Thorne Center, completed fellowship in combat medicine, published 2 papers on damage control resuscitation. Engaged to a pediatric surgeon, confident, happy, free. Thomas Webb, 8-month sober, Director of Patient Advocacy, helps over 200 veterans navigate health care every month, reconciled with his daughter, has his own apartment, volunteers at the VA hospital on weekends, working on a book about recovery. Vanessa Cole, resigned from nursing 6 weeks after Sterling's termination, returned to school for a master's in social work, now works at the VA helping homeless veterans, quiet, changed, trying to make amends for the years she spent enabling Sterling's abuse. Colonel James Morrison, fully recovered, returned to active duty with Delta Force, teaches combat medicine at the Morrison Thorne Center 1 week per month, calls Margaret every Sunday without fail, still calls her Ghost, recommended her for the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Nomination pending. Sergeant Wyatt Garrison promoted to Master Sergeant, instructor at the center's Combat Medic Training Program. Engaged to one of the ER nurses, building a house, happy. Admiral Preston Caldwell, retired from active duty, joined the Morrison Thorne Center's Board of Directors, ensures military and civilian medicine continue to work together. Proud grandfather of 3. Corporal Derek Jenkins, accepted position as trauma nurse at Morrison Thorne Center, enrolled in medical school. Margaret writes his recommendation letters. He's going to be an excellent doctor someday. The ceremony ended. Margaret walked through the new emergency room. It was humming with activity, professional, efficient, respectful. A trauma case was incoming. The team was preparing, moving with precision and purpose and mutual respect. Dr. Thorne, a young resident, ran up, eager, excited, not afraid. Multi-system trauma, ETA 2 minutes, 28-year-old male motorcycle accident, suspected internal injuries. "I'm on my way," Margaret said. She walked toward the trauma bay, past the supply closet, saw a young orderly struggling with a mop bucket. The wheel was stuck. He looked frustrated. embarrassed, worried someone would yell at him for being slow. Margaret stopped. She could keep walking. She was the director. She had a trauma to handle. Important things to do, but that's not who she was. That's not who she'd ever been. She walked over. The orderly saw her coming, saw the director badge on her white coat. His eyes widened. He flinched. Margaret knelt down, examined the wheel, gave it an expert kick. It snapped into place. "Sticks on the left side," she said gently. "Use your hips to turn it, not your back. Save your energy for the long shifts." The young man looked at her, shocked, grateful. "Thank you, ma'am," he stammered. Margaret stood, smiled. "You're welcome," she said. "What's your name?" "James, ma'am. James Riley." "Well, James, you're doing good work. Don't let anyone tell you different. And if anyone gives you trouble, anyone at all, you come find me. Understand?" James nodded, eyes wide. "Yes, ma'am." Margaret patted his shoulder, then turned and walked toward the trauma bay. The doors hissed open. The team was ready, gowned, gloved, positioned, waiting for her signal. Margaret pulled on her gloves. The latex snapped tight. "Let's save a life," she said. The doors closed behind her. She was exactly where she belonged. Outside, the sun climbed higher, painting the sky in shades of gold and blue. A new day, a better day. And somewhere in a strip mall 47 minutes away, Dr. Ryan Sterling was staring at his phone. At the news article about the Morrison Thorne Center, at the photo of Margaret cutting the ribbon, and at the statistics showing the center's success, at everything he'd lost. He put the phone down, picked up a syringe for the next Botox appointment. His hands were shaking. They always were now. His assistant knocked on the door. "Doctor, Sterling, your 3 o'clock is here. Mrs. Henderson." 4 headlines. He took a breath, tried to steady his hands, failed. "Tell her I'll be right there," he said. But he sat there for another 5 minutes, staring at his shaking hands, wondering how it all went so wrong. Fade to black, dedicated to the invisible heroes in Scrubs. To every nurse who saved a life and got no credit, to every veteran who served and came home, changed to every person who thought they were too old, too slow, too broken to matter. You are seen. You are valued. You are not invisible. Your competence matters more than their ego. Your experience matters more than their credentials. Your humanity matters more than their hierarchy. Stand up. Speak up. You matter.